She was never supposed to be the face of Tulsa's deadliest street war. Just a girl from the South Side, raised on food stamps, broken promises, and long stretches of silence. But Lakesha Davis, better known on the streets as K4, was built different. When the Hoovers cast her brother out and branded him a snitch, everything flipped. She didn't mourn, she retaliated. K4 didn't ask for respect, she took it, and she took it fast. Her name started echoing through Tulsa like a warning shot. People whispered that she moved harder than half the men in the game. Then came the broad daylight shooting, the moment that turned her from a feared name in the streets into front-page news. A man gunned down in a parking lot. No hesitation. No flinch. No second thoughts. Those few seconds, and everything that followed, shook Tulsa's gang scene to its core. But to understand how one woman could rise so fast and burn so hot, you have to understand the battleground she was fighting on, the streets of Tulsa. Tulsa gangs. When people think of America's gang capitals, they name the usual suspects: Chicago, Los Angeles, Detroit. Tulsa rarely makes the list, but the truth is, it should. By the late 70s and 80s, Oklahoma's gang problem was already carved into its walls and alleys. Shopping centers and housing projects were plastered with graffiti: "Crips are all. Bloods rule." The warnings were there, but few paid attention. Then, on August 27, 1986, the Oklahoman dropped an article that rattled the city. Rumors swirled that recruiters from Los Angeles had come to Tulsa. Their mission? To mold young, restless, broke kids into soldiers, drug dealers, thieves, pimps, enforcers. Overnight, gangs stopped being a rumor and became a reality. Community leaders like Thomas Brown of Higher Dimensions Family Church weren't shocked. He called Tulsa a baby version of LA, slowly growing into a full-blown gangland city. And he wasn't wrong. Poverty was high, opportunity was low, and on the north side, entire neighborhoods were drowning in both. Projects like Comanche Park became ground zero, raided by cops, locked down by patrols, feared by anyone outside its walls. And it wasn't alone. Morning Star, Apache Manor, Town Square, Mohawk Manor, Osage Hills. Each one carried a reputation. Built in the 60s and 70s to help low-income families, these housing projects quickly transformed into breeding grounds for violence and neglect. At first, Tulsa's streets were dominated by just two names: Crips and Bloods. But as the years rolled on, things fractured. New cliques, new sets, new alliances, each one carving out its own reputation. And the rules changed. Fistfights and fades gave way to pistols and drive-bys. By recent counts, Tulsa is home to over 2,000 active gang members and affiliates, each flying their own colors, throwing their own signs, and living by their own codes. But here's the thing: Tulsa isn't like LA or Chicago. There are no strict borders or carved-up territories. It's not about what block you're born on. It's about who you roll with. Rivals can live 3 doors apart. Neighbors can be enemies. And that invisible tension? It can snap at any moment. Tulsa's gangs don't just hang in the shadows. They're in the mix: armed robberies, burglaries, scams, drug deals, and shootings. And at the top of that violent food chain sits one name that commands both fear and respect: the Hoover criminal gangs. Born on the west side of south-central Los Angeles, the Hoovers planted roots deep in Tulsa soil. And once they did, the city was never the same. It all traces back to the 1960s, right around 92nd Street and Hoover Avenue in Los Angeles. That's where the story begins. At the time, they weren't even known as Crips. They called themselves the Hoover Groovers, a loose crew of young men from different blocks, sharing the same energy, trying to carve out their place in a city already hardened by poverty and violence. When the Crip movement began gaining traction on the west side, especially near St. Andrews Park, the Hoovers aligned themselves with it. It wasn't an official merger, more a street-level alliance, but soon the identity stuck. By 1973, the Hoover Groovers had rebranded as the 92 Hoover Crips, and from there, new Hoover sets spread quickly, from 43rd to 112th Street. Each had its own character, but they all flew the same name: the Hoovers 3X. Then came 1979, a pivotal year. That summer, the Rolling 60s and the 8-Tray gangster Crips fell into a violent split that fractured the Crip world. Gangs had to choose sides. Crews aligned with the Rolling 60s became neighborhood Crips, also called Deuces or 2X, while those who sided with the 8-Trays became gangster Crips, Tray or 3X. The Hoovers threw in with the gangsters, proudly carrying the 3X identity. But in August 1979, everything escalated. Raymond Lee Washington, one of the original founders of the Crips, was gunned down in a drive-by. Street rumors suggested the Hoovers played a role. Whether true or not, the accusation alone ignited open warfare. Crews still loyal to Washington turned on the Hoovers, and from that moment, bloodshed defined their reputation. By the mid-1980s, the Hoover name had become synonymous with violence. Even other Crip sets distanced themselves. The crack epidemic only intensified their rise. With major connections like Freeway Ricky Ross, who was tied to the 52 and 74 Hoover sets, the Hoovers built a powerful foothold in the drug trade, along with the police heat that followed. By the 1990s, the Hoovers had grown weary of Crip politics. Surrounded by rivals, including the East Coast Crips, Main Streets, Rolling 60s, and Rolling Hundreds, they chose to break away. They dropped the Crip label and began calling themselves Hoover Criminals, a name that reflected their isolation and aggression. The 74 Hoovers were the first to adopt the shift, while others, like the 52s, kept the Gangster Crip title. Across most sets, one thing stayed constant: their ABK, EBK mentality, anybody killer, everybody killer. Their walls bore tags like BK, Blood Killer, CK, Crip Killer, and OK, Rolling Zeros Killer, signs of their willingness to war with anyone. When the Hoover name spread to Tulsa, Oklahoma, it wasn't just one crew making noise. Multiple sets emerged: 107, 54, 63, 57, and 27 Hoovers, all active in the city's gang landscape. But among them, the 107 Hoovers stood out. Known for their numbers, their influence, and their reputation for being the loudest and most aggressive, they became a dominant force in Tulsa's streets. For many of Tulsa's youth, the Hoovers represented both fear and aspiration. Kids growing up in neighborhoods defined by poverty, broken homes, and limited opportunity often found themselves pulled in long before they understood what it meant. Gang life offered what seemed like power, loyalty, money, and protection. But for most, it ended in prison or the grave. Early life of Lakesha. Lakesha Davis was one of those who came up in this environment. Raised in Tulsa, she lived in a world where young people were often forced into impossible choices: survive by walking the straight path with nothing, or embrace the streets with all their danger and allure. Her story became one more chapter in the cycle of a city shaped by gangs, poverty, and violence. Lakesha's world shifted when she started spending time heavy on Tulsa's south side, especially around East 64th Street in Newport. That's where she got close to a man police identify as a ranking member of the 52 Red Mob Bloods, not just any member, but the one credited with founding a set called 64 SND. Their reputation? Simple and deadly: Hoover Killers. Their mission was to erase Hoover sets from the map, block by block. By linking with them, Lakesha was no longer just hanging out in the streets, she was standing in the crossfire of deep gang politics. But her story twisted even more when her own brother got caught up in the opposite camp. He had once rolled with the 57 Garrison Block Hoovers, an affiliate of the 107 Hoover Crips. But then word spread that he'd been pushed out, branded a snitch. The street said it all tied back to one night, July 31, 2022. It was just after 1 a.m. when 17-year-old TK, Trick, Chairs was behind the wheel of a stolen Kia. His family was out of town, and he had just left a rap party on the north side. Heading east on the Broken Arrow Expressway, between Memorial and Sheridan, the ride turned fatal. A shootout erupted, maybe sparked elsewhere, but it ended on the highway. Bullets tore through the car. Trick was killed instantly. The passenger beside him was riddled with 6 shots but survived. Another occupant bolted from the car and vanished into the night. Tulsa police got the first calls right around 1 a.m. Shots fired on the BA. By the time they arrived, the scene was chaos. Casings from multiple firearms were scattered across the road. This wasn't a quick drive-by, it was a running gun battle that stretched from the I-44 interchange down to 41st Street. The entire highway had to be shut down for hours. As investigators worked to identify Trick, they turned to his social media, and what they found shocked even his own mother, Tina. Online, TK portrayed an image of toughness, guns, and loyalty posts with neighborhood crews. But to Tina, that wasn't her son. She remembered him as quiet, caring, protective of his younger brothers, someone with dreams of college, not a boy living for violence. She believed the shooting came down to nothing more than petty street drama, teens mean mugging, throwing shade, flexing for clout. Social media, she said, played a deadly role, creating a fantasy world where kids thought they had to perform toughness. Lieutenant Demetrios Triantafyllis of Tulsa's crime gun unit agreed. He explained that many of the shootings tied directly back to online beefs, insults, threats, and images posted to boost status. But when kids finally met face to face, that digital bravado exploded into real gunfire. He shared disturbing examples, teens posing with pistols, throwing gang signs, even laying weapons on the graves of dead rivals like trophies. Trick himself appeared in posts surrounded by boys pledging loyalty. In another, a 12-year-old flashed a gun, threatening another gang. It had become a reckless game of who could go further, a game that too often ended in funerals. Police, meanwhile, stepped up. Units like Triantafyllis focused on seizing illegal firearms and tracking repeat shooters, targeting the city's most violent players before the next tragedy. But in Trick's case, justice didn't come quickly. There were no immediate arrests, no clear suspects. Detectives put out flyers, opened anonymous tip lines, and even offered cash rewards. The money changed things. Slowly, tips trickled in, and the investigation turned. In August, police arrested 18-year-old Brandon Jefferson, believed to be the driver of the other vehicle in the highway shootout. He was charged with murder. Jefferson claimed he never fired a shot, that it was his passengers, but the law didn't see it that way. A month later, another arrest came, this time in Houston, Texas. Authorities tracked down Isai Shanks, charging him with nearly the same crimes as Jefferson. Both men landed in the Tulsa County Jail, staring down heavy time. Shortly after, detectives closed in on a third suspect, Tavon Herring. Still, for families like Tina's, the answers were hollow. Trick's death wasn't just about one car, one highway, or one night, it was about the larger storm sweeping Tulsa. Gangs. Social media. Teenagers playing a role that wasn't real until the bullets made it permanent. He was pulled over during a traffic stop in West Tulsa, right in the parking lot of a fast food joint off Gilcrease Museum Road. The charges were serious: first-degree murder, shooting with intent to kill, and even using a vehicle as a weapon. Detectives made it clear the investigation wasn't over. They were still following leads to see if more people had been involved. The fourth suspect, Leonis Alterner, was later located and arrested in Okmulgee, also tied to the murder of Trick Chairs. In the end, Brandon Jefferson, Isai Shanks, Tavon Herring, and Leonis Alterner all faced first-degree murder charges along with shooting with intent to kill. Investigators believed they had everyone responsible for Trick's death in custody. Rumor on the street suggested that K4's brother had named one of the suspects to the police, and that tip led to all four arrests. After that, the gang turned their backs on him. K4 and her brother had always been inseparable, but once he was branded a snitch, everything changed. Some say that betrayal pushed her to switch sides and join a rival crew. Of all the Hoover sets she could have aligned with, she picked 64 SND, a clear declaration of war. And despite being a girl, K4 carried herself like a force of nature. She wasn't just part of the streets, she embodied them. Her walk, her talk, her style, it all screamed that she was one of the homies, not someone's little sister. On the streets, people called her a stud, assuming she was into girls. There was also a rumor that she had a baby with a man named Chuck, who supposedly died in a car crash. Nobody could confirm it, it became part of local folklore. But her reputation? That was real. Once she took on the name K4, a switch flipped. She went from a background figure to one of the most feared bloods in Oklahoma. Word was, she always carried a blicky, and some claimed she was heavily involved in robberies, targeting rival gang members, and sometimes random civilians, especially near the quick trip stores around Tulsa. Her baggy clothes weren't just style, they were tactical, hiding whatever she carried. Nobody ever knew if she was strapped, which kept everyone on edge. But K4 didn't need a gun to make herself felt. Witnesses swore she could handle herself barehanded, trading blows with rival gang members like she had nothing to lose. And she wasn't just tough, she was cold. That stare, dead eyes, hunger mixed with rage, it wasn't anger, it was possession. People described her as something not entirely human, something out of nightmares. Some called her a demon, others labeled her a stick-up kid, hitting licks on the regular. Yet despite all the stories, no robbery charges ever stuck. By age 17, K4 was deep in a bloody war against the Hoovers. That's when things escalated further. She joined forces with FNB, forming Southeast Notorious Village, a shocking alliance of Bloods and Crips under one flag, Hoover Killer. This new coalition was ruthless. They didn't care whether someone belonged to a rival set or was just in the wrong place, they were a target. On one occasion, they even kidnapped a 57 Hoover member, cut off his dreads, and forced him to retract his disrespect. But anyone familiar with Tulsa knew 64 SND was always the loudest in the beef. They pushed boundaries relentlessly, boasting in interviews and music videos about their attacks on the Hoovers. Tension was constant. Nothing stopped them. And then, one day, everything blew up for 4:0001. It was January 18, 2024, a busy afternoon at a strip mall near 58th Street in Peoria, Tulsa. Cars came and went, shoppers moved about their day, when suddenly, chaos erupted. Out of nowhere, 5 men rolled up and stole a truck right there in the parking lot. 2 of them jumped in the vehicle and sped off, while the other 3 casually walked away as if nothing had happened. But then came the twist nobody saw coming. K4, who had witnessed the entire incident, didn't call the police. Instead, she approached the 3 men, drew a gun, and opened fire. Clifford Pazana, known locally as Trey, was hit and fell to the pavement. K4 didn't stop there, she kept shooting, chasing off the other 2 as they ran for their lives. Police received the first call around 2 p.m. about gunfire at the strip mall. When they arrived, Pazana was lying on the asphalt, riddled with bullets, already dead. The area had a bloody history. Just a month prior, another shootout had occurred there, and earlier that January, a stabbing at a nearby apartment complex added to the chaos. Pazana's death marked the 7th homicide in Tulsa that month, already surpassing the typical count. Initially, officers suspected a personal argument led to the shooting, but surveillance footage quickly identified Lakesha Davis as the shooter. The 2 carjackers who had fled to Savannah Landing Apartments later confirmed her involvement during a photo lineup. They told authorities that K4 targeted them because they were Hoover Crips while she was affiliated with the Bloods. Both men were arrested for the carjacking, but police later clarified that the robbery and shooting were not directly connected. Clifford Pazana's family was devastated. His sister, DA, spoke out, demanding justice for her brother. Tulsa PD released photos of K4 holding the gun, asking the public to report any tips, even anonymously. On January 31st, a tip came in. Davis was hiding in an apartment not far from the scene. Police moved in around 5 p.m., arresting her and taking her to Tulsa County Jail, where she was charged with first-degree murder. Her bond was set at $1 million. Media coverage painted K4 as a heartless figure, stepping into chaos with lethal intent. But the story was more complex. Clifford Pazana was allegedly tied to the 57th Garrison Block Hoovers, the same set K4's brother had been connected to. Rumors circulated that Trey and his crew had recently been involved in a robbery. Some claimed it was a targeted hit, others said it was a street fight that escalated. K4's supporters argued she acted in self-defense. Oklahoma's laws allow individuals to protect themselves in public if threatened. If K4 saw a robbery in progress and someone pointed a gun at her, she may have been legally justified in firing. But the problem came after Trey was down. Reports indicate she continued shooting even after he was clearly no longer a threat. That's when self-defense crossed the line into criminal violence, excessive force, potentially second-degree murder. After the shooting, K4 disappeared for 13 days. No calls, no surrender, just gone. That disappearance seriously undermined her case. Prosecutors argued it showed she knew she had overstepped, making the incident less about self-defense and more about intentional violence. By March 6, 2025, 18-year-old Lakesha Dawn Davis stood in court and entered a no-contest plea. She didn't admit guilt, but she didn't fight the charges either. The court convicted her of 1 count of amended manslaughter and 2 counts of shooting with intent to kill, each carrying a 20-year sentence. Altogether, K4 was sentenced to 60 years in prison, meaning she won't be free until 2085, when she'll be 78 years old.